Bad boyfriends using attachment theory to avoid Mr. or Mrs. Wrong and make you a better partner by Jeb Kinninson. Author's note: human loneliness is one of the hidden problems of our technologically advanced and mobile age. As our lives get more complicated and our neighborhood of friends has expanded to include social networks, the loss of community feeling to business and isolated life is acutely felt. In this detached world, a good partner, companion, or a spouse is more important than ever. Most people are unaware of modern attachment theory, developed starting in the 1940s by psychoanalyst John Bowlby, observing the homeless and orphaned children of World War II, further developed in children by developmental psychologist Mary Ainsworth in the 1970s, and extended to adults by Cindy Hazen and Philin Shaver in the late 1980s. While there have been some efforts to explain the theory to the lay audience, who could surely apply it usefully in their lives, it remains obscure. This book was written to explain attachment theory and its application to relationships, to those searching for loyal and trustworthy companions in life. Far too many friends and neighbors have floundered with relationship issues that sap them of energy and make them unhappy. Not every such problem can be solved, but knowing what the landscape of attachment looks like can guide one to a better way of communicating and a better way of living. Forward. This book is intended to be a practical guide to using the modern science of attachment and relationships to guide the questioning toward a more fulfilling life. If you were brought up in the Western world, you've been trained on fairy tales of love and relationships that are misleading at best, and at worst, have you making mistake after mistake and starting relationships with the wrong kinds of people who will waste your time and keep you from finding a loyal partner. Science has the answer, or at least a guide to save you the time and effort of discovering for yourself how many wrong types of romantic partners there are. Reading this book will help you recognize the signs of some of the syndromes that prevent people from being good partners. We'll go through those syndromes and point out some of the signs. Those little red flags you sometimes notice when you are getting to know someone? Often they speak loud and clear once you understand the types, and you can decide immediately to run away or approach with caution those who show them. If you're young and just starting to look for a partner, good news. The world is swarming with well-adjusted, charming matches for you, if you know how to recognize them. The bad news? You are inexperienced, and you may not recognize the type of person when you date them. Many people expect to experience an immediate sense of excitement, an overwhelming rush of attraction, and to fall in love rapidly and equally with someone who feels the same. This rarely happens, and when it does, it usually ends badly. And expecting it will cause you to let go of people who are steady, loving, and attentive if you had given them a chance. So once you've identified someone who makes you laugh, answers your messages, and is there for you when you want them, don't make the mistake of tossing them aside for the merely good-looking, sexy, or intriguing stranger. Many friends I have known coupled up with the strong person and took up to 20 years to realize it before finally giving up and divorcing, because they didn't know their dysfunctional relationship didn't have to be that way, and so they stuck with it far longer than they should have, hoping it would get better. If you're older, bad news. While you were spending time and effort on relationships you were hoping would turn out better, or even happily nestled in a good relationship or two, most of the secure, reliable, sane people in your age group got paired off. They are married or happily enfamilied, and most of the people your age in the dating pool are tragically unable to form a good long-term relationship. You should always ask yourself, why is this one still available? There may be a good answer, recently widowed or left a long-term relationship, or it may be that this person has just been extraordinarily unlucky in having over 20 short relationships in 20 years, to cite one case. But it's far more likely you have met someone with a problematic attachment style. As you age past 40, the percentage of the dating pool that is able to form a secure, stable relationship drops to less than 20%. And since it can take months of dating to understand why Mr. or Mrs. Seems Nice is really the future ex-partner from hell, being able to recognize the difficult types will help you recognize them faster and move on to the next. This book outlines the basics, which might be all you need, and points you toward more resources if you want to understand more about your problem partner. If you're wondering if the guy or girl you've been hanging out with might not be quite right, this is the place to match those little red flags you've noticed with known bad types. And by getting out fast, you can avoid emotional damage and wasted time, and get going on finding someone who's really right for you. Study all of the bad types, and you will detect them before even getting involved. Or you could be one of the people who recognizes their own problems in one of these types. These are study materials and plans of action for you too. If you've had lots of relationships and they all seem to go wrong, the common factor is you. Your task is to make yourself into a better partner, a goal that even the most evolved of us can always work toward. I promised you science, and here's some that is very good to know. Attachment theory. Psychologists have noticed that children whose caregivers, generally mothers, were either unresponsive to their needs or overly concerned by their needs tended to have children with problems relating to others in a secure way. If the child's needs had been ignored or only grudgingly attended to, the child would be avoidant, meaning the child would stop seeking comfort or ignore the caregiver. Children who are given a mix of comfort when needed and inattention or unwanted attention inconsistently often end up anxious, preoccupied. The child is afraid and needs constant reassurance to feel safe, often clinging to the caregiver and being too afraid to explore out of sight. A secure child, on the other hand, was used to having their cries met with comfort and assistance, but only when needed, and learned the language of love, messages of, "I'm here if you need me," and "You're safe." Secure children eventually feel safe enough to explore and leave the caregiver's side without fear, since they know their cries will be heard and responded to, even from a distance. In the late 80s, this understanding of children's attachment types was extended to adults. Early upbringing tends to set up the emotional mechanisms for handling all significant relationships, with an adult's style of handling partner and even friendship relationships heavily influenced by the patterns learned in early childhood. And adults with secure patterns have more satisfying, lasting, and successful relationships than adults with other patterns. Later chapters describe each of the adult attachment types and how you can recognize them. Your match with another's type is critical to making a relationship work. And aside from attachment types that are wrong for you, that are the truly hazardous. People with abnormal psychologists who are not crazy enough to be in jail or an institution, but who can be charming and lead apparently successful lives while still being dangerous to your mental health and well-being, should you be so unlucky as to find yourself in a relationship with one. Remember that in normal life, we use politeness and social manners to avoid knowing too much about the hundreds of people we have to deal with. Those with psychopathologies can pass for normal for long periods of time in common everyday interactions, and if careful, can avoid detection by most people. So your psychopathic neighbor gets along reasonably well at school or church or business, while quietly hurting small animals, and no one's the wiser until you date him or her. Under this category of really bad potential partners, we have psychopaths, sadists, those who histrionic personality disorder, and the extremely common abusive narcissist. Each of these gets their own chapter. And if it turns out you are the problem, you recognize yourself in one of the case studies, you show the signs and mental habits of being a bad partner, and you failed in multiple relationships because something always seems to go wrong, there's hope for you. Your task is to overcome these bad mental habits and make yourself into the kind of person whose feelings and loyalties can be relied on, who can be a good partner to someone else. And then you will find someone who deserves you. This book is designed to give you the information you need to find your best partner. The field of attachment studies and the science of human emotion is growing rapidly, and if you'd like to know more and are interested in deeper readings, check out the references and bibliography. A General Theory of Love by Thomas Lewis, M.D., is a great introduction. In general, male and female pronouns will be used interchangeably, except when a syndrome is most commonly demonstrated in one sex. Dismissives, for example, are more likely males, while the stereotypical histrionic personality is female. There are always exceptions to these stereotypes. There is also nothing different in attachment terms about gay or lesbian relationships. Most likely readers of this book are female, as is generally true of self-help books, but especially those on relationship-oriented topics. But men can also be puzzled and need knowledge when their partners have a troublesome attachment style. So welcome men. Any examples in this book, while drawn from real life, are fictional. The names, chronologies, and details have been changed. Part 1. Emotional Communication. Before we start talking about attachment types in detail, let's cover some background in neuroscience and communication and how people regulate their degree of intimacy with others. Exciting new research into the brain structure, development, and function in recent years has complicated the simple model of the triune brain that I present here, but this is still a useful model for how instinct, emotion, and rational thought interact. And while I will focus on the effect of early caregiving on the attachment type of adults, there is almost certainly some genetic component. Some people are born with a tendency to security despite caregiving lapses, while others may have reasonably good parenting, yet still end up insecure in adulthood. But it is clear that early caregiving has a critically important effect on adult security and attachment type. Chapter 1. The Triune Brain. Human brains have three main parts. First to evolve was the core reptilian brain, which handles basic functioning of the body and primitive reflexes. All vertebrate animals have this. Next came the limbic system, developed to a greater extent in mammals, which handles emotional and basic social functioning. Layered on top of that is the neocortex, new brain, which was last to evolve in mammals, but is massively more developed in the human family tree. This huge new brain annex handles the verbal and intellectual processing that sets us apart from other mammals. Recent research complicates this picture. The human brain and all brains are complex systems resulting from the differentiation of neurostem cells, programmed with simple rules to operate in response to their chemical and electrical environment. These rules are set forth in the genes, but during the massive proliferation of new neurons both before birth and after, neurons form patterns and layers, structures, and pathways, far more complex than we can truly understand as yet, and then are further winnowed and modified by early training. Neuroscientists attempt to understand the function of each part, but while we may be correct in saying the brain stem, reptilian brain, is primarily coordinating the autonomic nervous system that keeps all animal bodies functioning, it is more complexly connected than that. And similarly, the cortex and cerebellum are connected and evolved to function together. So it is an oversimplification to say the limbic system is located in the cerebellum. The functional distinctions are useful in understanding how our senses, actions, and plans are coordinated, but not rigidly reflected in the brain's structure. Our consciousness and verbalism are recent additions to our species. It is easy to forget that all of our thoughts and the streams of words and symbols that run through our heads when we are thinking are easily overruled by the more primitive sublayers, which were designed to keep us alive and compel nonverbal, unthought reactions in the case of threat. Our limbic system in particular keeps track of the world around us and reacts to what is sensed to produce emotions to attract, repel, attack, or embrace. Attachment is a limbic phenomenon. Love is deeper than words, and sometimes beyond our ability to verbalize. The dance of signals between mother and child in the child's first years develops the child's emotional system and its emotional response to other human beings. And while children can learn from all the caregivers in their lives, the first is the most important. Children who were not touched and responded to in early life often sicken and die. And children who are given the wrong kinds of signals will spend a lifetime being lonely or having trouble with their partners as a result. Chapter 2. People who need people. Our culture is full of models and stories about love and relationships. First, there's the fairy tale of two lovers finding their uniquely perfect partner, falling madly and mutually in love before they can possibly really know each other, and living happily ever after in a cottage with a wide picket fence. While this does happen, it's not common, and real tales of love and long-term partnership are rarely so simple and sweet. Then there's the recent hubbub over codependence, an idea which began in addiction studies, where an alcoholic, drug addict, or other self-destructive person is enabled by a partner who works to prevent the addict from either getting better or reaching the point of despair sufficient to convince the addict to start anew. Is dependence on another a bad thing, or unhealthy as sometimes implied? No, of course not. We are all dependent as children, and depend on each other more or less our entire lives to accomplish things and feel happy. In a theme we'll return to over and over. Being dependent on a reliable person when you need it is good. Being unable to function without the support of others when you need is bad. As noted later, the most secure children are raised by mothers who seem to sense it almost before their child needs help and assist immediately and just enough, while not hovering or invading the child's independence when they are exploring the world just fine alone. We see that the same just when needed, just the right amount principle of dependence acts between the best partners and best friends. The best partner is responsive to your signals, and you, as a good partner, signal only when you really need help. Most of the trouble in relationships is about bad signaling and poor responses.